Okay, so today's session, Christina's asked me to talk to you about advanced APIs and the really advanced web service development. Okay, so I'm not going to. What I'm going to do, I don't know if the rest of the labs are the same as the lab I take, but to be honest with you, I think we're so far behind with the work, we need a bit of time to catch up and to consolidate what we know already. So I haven't told her this, she's happily sitting in Hong Kong at the moment, and by the time she gets back it'll be too late. So I'm going to go over some of the key concepts that we've done so far and try and make some sense of what we've been dealing with. So it's a bit bitty, there's lots of bits and pieces that we're going to be covering today, but hopefully they'll all sort of make a bit of sense. So I'm covering 6 different topics today. Each one is nice and bite-sized, small bite-sized topics. And the lab for this week is manageable. Okay, so we've got a nice easy lab for this week. So what we're going to do is talk about pair programming, which is a Scrum-style rapid development technique. We're going to look at how we architecture complicated apps as we get more than a couple of pages, how we make sense of it all. We're going to look at how we log information. I'm going to show you, you know that log thing that pops up on the screen when you run the app with all the error messages in? I'm going to show you how to put your own messages in that log file and how to change the level of login to make sense of it. We're going to look at how we pass data from page to page in the URL, because obviously you're going to need to pass data around from page to page without having to faff around with post data. We're going to read JSON data, a nice simple 3-line script to get some data out of web services, really simple stuff. And then I'm going to finish off by looking at dictionaries and arrays, how we actually break this data apart into structures and make use of it in the app. To support this, I have put a zip file of a working, hopefully, I tested it last night, a working Google App Engine app. And you're going to be downloading that, putting it into Google App Engine, running it, and the lab is based on extending that task. So you're going to understand it and extend it. Pair programming. Okay, agile software development. I've done this with commercial teams in the past. The idea is 2 people work on the same computer. So first of all, it saves money having to buy lots of computers. But most importantly, it actually improves productivity. You know how when you get stuck, you ask someone for help and they look at your code and they say, there's the problem. Yeah, straight away. It's having that on a permanent basis. So there's always a second pair of eyes on the code, checking you're doing things right and checking for any errors. So there's 2 roles, the driver and the observer, or the driver and the navigator. And for the lab this week, I would like you to give this a go, give it a spin. And what you're going to do in the lab, for the first 20 minutes, you're working in pairs. One person is the driver, the other person's navigator. After 20 minutes, you swap over, and you keep swapping over every 20 minutes. What it means is the person typing the code is always fresh. There's less chance of making mistakes. It means the person observing or navigating can look at the structure, look at what they're doing, and look for any errors and any issues and prompt them and help them out. So the idea is one person writes the code and the other one reviews the code, looks for errors, looks for better ways of doing things, looks at how things fit together. That's why it's called a navigator role. And the important thing is you keep swapping over, you keep swapping roles over between you. So one person types, the other one points, basically. One typer, one pointer. And I'd like to give it a go because I want to give see how it works for you. And it might be that when you come to your project, your assignment, you could use the same technique for your assignment, working together as pairs. Okay, so that's it. I told you, really quick topics, didn't I? That's one slide for the first topic. The slides are on Moodle, by the way, ready for you to look at. Next thing we're going to talk about is architecture. Now, everything you've had so far, you've got a YAML file, haven't you, which is all your settings. You've got your controller file, which is your PY file, and you've probably got a template file kicking around in a folder somewhere. And the more complicated your project becomes, the more code gets added to this Python file, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, doesn't it? Until eventually you're scrolling up and down trying to figure out where things fit together. I don't like that. Basically, there's a rule of thumb which says if the code fits on the screen, it's easy to debug. So if all the code for one page fits on one screen in your computer, you can very quickly track what's going on. If you have to scroll up and down within the code, you lose track of where you are and you lose track of how things fit together. So my rule is you should have every script should be no more than 1 page long, 1 screen long, so you can see what you're doing. Apart from my phone development, which could be sort of 20 screens long. So the idea is we're going to help understanding, make it easy to maintain your code, and we're going to break big problems into small problems. So for your lab this week, I'm going to give you a couple of Python files. For your lab, you're going to create new Python files and add more Python files to the same project, rather than trying to add code to the existing Python files, to make it easier for you to see what's going on. So there's your 3 files. Your app.yaml is your configuration, your Python files are your controller files, and you've got your template files. What we're going to do, we can only have 1 configuration file, but we're going to point that configuration file to lots of different Python files. So you can see in this example, now did the previous versions have a static dir for templates? Did you have a static directory for templates? You can't remember. If there's a folder which doesn't have executable code in it, doesn't have Python files, you should always flag it as a static directory, like I've shown there. Because otherwise, when you compile your code and try and run it, it goes to all your files in the templates folder to see if they're executable. If you just put a little message in there to say ignore it, it'll compile much faster and run quicker. So try and flag your static files as static files. Now if you look underneath it, I've actually got 3 Python files going on there. Each of my pages is a separate Python file, which means I can focus on 1 file without breaking anything else. Now all these .star businesses, we'll talk about those in a minute. The genres page, if I put /genres in, it's going to run the genres Python file, and I can put my code inside there. If I put in books and then put something after the slash, that's what the ./ means, it'll go to the books Python file. The / is regular expression. The dot means any character at all, and these asterisks means 1 or more of them. So basically, if you put a / and put anything after that books /, it'll run the books app. If you miss the / out, it will ignore it because it thinks it doesn't match up, does it? /books means /books and nothing else. /books /.star means books and then anything you want. So it'll always run that Python file. And I've got a details page. You can see that, can't you? That's your first lab task. I'm going to give you the genres. I'm going to give you the books. You're going to build the details page as part of your lab. And you can see I simply add an extra couple of lines to the YAML file for each of these pages I'm building. And it means at a glance I can see exactly what files are what, can't I? I can see what file does which part and maps to which path. Okay, so that's configuration files. And again, 2 slides, topic finished. So that's 2 out of 6 topics done, and we're still only quarter past. Okay, we're doing well today. Login information, this is the biggie. This is the one, it took me about 4 hours to figure out how to get this working. Because the Google documentation is wrong. It's completely and utterly wrong. If you follow the Google documentation, it doesn't work. So I've had lots of messing around, playing, changing things, trying to get this to work, and I think I've got it working now. Basically, as you store stuff in variables and get data out of web services and get URLs and things, you want to make sure that you've got the right information. So it's always good to be able to log stuff to that log screen to see what you've got. You could send it to the template, but if you send it to the log screen, you can very quickly grab the output and see what the variables contain. Now, to do this, you have to use the login library. And I've put the link to it there, but bear in mind that there are bits of that documentation which are wrong, and I'll explain what those bits are in a moment. Basically, there's actually 5 levels there, aren't there? Even I can count now. There's five log levels, ranging from debug to critical. By default, only errors and criticals get logged to the log file. So if you send a warning log message, it'll ignore it. If you send a debug log message, it'll ignore it. And that's what I'm going to show you how to fix. That's the bit that's wrong in the documentation. And the idea is, if you specify a warning level, everything from that level upwards gets logged. So if I specify warning as my login level, it'll log warnings, errors and criticals. Does that make sense? If I set my login level to debug, it'll log all 5 levels. So you've got to determine which levels of log messages you want. And this is the bit you have to fix. This is the bit that's wrong. To change the login levels, you have to go to the application settings in your Google App Engine launcher. And you have to add a flag to the console basically for it to work. So that I've said log level equals debug in there. And that sets the level to debug and above. So make sure you do that. And you have to do this for each application. So if you've got 3 applications in Google App Engine, you have to do it separately for each of those 3 applications. Otherwise, it will ignore it. And this is all you have to do. You import login, it's a standard Python library, and I can log any level now. Look, login.debug up to login.critical. And all that happens is that text then appears in my log screen. So if you're getting some data out of an API, some JSON data, let's say, before you do anything, you should grab the JSON data and then send it to the log screen to see if the JSON data is there, to see whether it's found it or not, before you move on. So it's baby steps. You get some data, you send the data to the log screen to make sure it's correct. You then do something with the data, you send that to the log screen to make sure it's right. Small steps to make sure it's working. And this is how it looks. And you see, look, debug message, information, warning message. That's how it appears in the log console to prove it really did work. And I haven't just done it in Photoshop afterwards too. But that's how you set your login levels, and that's how you get things to log properly. You should be doing logging all the time. This should be something you do as a matter of course as you develop your applications. So, 1, 2, we're on topic 4 now. We're doing really well today. Passing data in the URL. Now, the application I'm going to give you is the first page has a list of categories. It's the bookshop one, if anyone does 305. I've just borrowed that one for the sake of this one. There's also smiling faces around there, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's basically the documentation I've put in 321.com. The documentation's there. It's a nice, easy API to play with and get working. I wrote it for 305, and it's a nice, easy starting point. Now, let's just go through a few options first. You know your WSGI application instance at the bottom of your Python file. You know what I mean? This actually should have been the previous section, by the way. You know that it says debug equals true? You just copied and pasted it, haven't you? You just left it as default. By default, it puts a little comment that says debug equals true. That means the debugging works. All the login messages work. When you finish developing it and you want to put it on the people to use it, you should always change that to debug equals false. So it's not constantly spurring out debug messages all the time, which will slow things down. So it's set properly for development, but not for distribution. Right. 2 things. Remember the request handler class? Okay. Remember that class, you created the class, then you created gets and puts and posts and things. That actually generates the content, doesn't it, and sends it back to the browser. At the bottom, you've got that WSGI application, haven't you, that routes incoming requests based on the path. We're going to have to change that and do something a bit clever to this for this to work. Now, passing parameters, there's my request handler class. Now, can you tell me what I've added? Think how it normally looks. What have I added to this particular request handler? Look at the def get. How many parameters are there normally in the def get? Just the one, isn't it? Self. I've added genre in there. That's my parameter. That's the value I'm passing across to my page. And once I've got that genre, you can see I can print it out. I can do stuff with it. So this method we can add extra parameters to this method, so we can pass extra data into our methods to do what we want to do. Okay, so keep that in your mind for the moment. I'm now going to show you the WSGI application handler. Now, that's changed dramatically. If you can see it. Now, look at the string at the bottom. Can you see it's got an R in front of it? That lowercase r. That means it's a regular expression. Anyone come across regular expressions before? It's pattern matching. It's built patterns into your string and it matches them to do different things. So that R means we're dealing with a regular expression. If you miss that out, it just won't work. Now, can you see I've got /books, and then after the next / I've got .* in those brackets. Well, those brackets means that's my parameter. That's what it's going to grab and turn into that genre variable. So I could have lots of parameters. I could have brackets, .* brackets, /, another brackets, .* brackets, and I can pass as many values in my URL as I want to the page. And all that happens is the first pair of brackets, it grabs the value and stores it in the genre variable. And then if there's another parameter, it'll grab the next set of brackets and stick it in the next value. So, for example, if I had books / and then I had a particular ISBN number in my URL, that ISBN number will get grabbed out of there and stored in that variable. In this case, I've got different genre IDs, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It grabs the value and passes it to my method. So I could have one link in my page which displays genres in category 1, so books in genre category 1. I could go to another link and change the number at the top in my URL to display the next type of book. And I can pass values in my URL to display different information. Now, there's a lot of blank faces going on here. What I'm going to do, I think, is when we finish this, I'm going to pull up a demo, pull up the code which I've given you to work with, and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. Might be easier. I'll fire up Google App Engine and we'll have a little play with it and see it working. The important thing is, if you want to use parameters, if you want to pass values in the URL, you have to add these little brackets into the WSGI application path, and then you have to add the parameters to the variables. You have to add that genre bit. You see, self, comma, and then something else. So that's how we pass data across into the pages. I'm now on topic 5, I think, out of 6, so we're doing really well. So there's time at the end for me to have a play and show you how it all works and fits together. Reading JSON data. The web service you're going to be dealing with, for which the documentation is all on Moodle, you pass it a URL and it gives you back some data in JSON format. And JSON format looks like this. This is JSON data. This is how the data is structured. And whatever web service you deal with, whether it's Flickr, Facebook, Twitter, anything else, it's always the same format. And this is actually the feed, the data you get from the genres feed. And if you look carefully, you can see that funny curly brace right at the top left? A curly brace means it's a... Anyone who's done 305? Dictionary. It was one of the two, wasn't it? It's a dictionary. The square bracket, see after genres, that little funny big square bracket, it's an array. So you can read this, but this text contains variables, arrays, dictionaries, all in text, all transported as text. So you can see that in this dictionary there is a key called status and it stores a string called success. You see at the top there? The next line down has a key called bytes and there's an integer. There's a whole number there, isn't there, stored in there. Underneath it there's a self-link, which is another string which contains the URL inside the string. The next line is keys called genres and it contains an array which contains our information. And each item in the array contains a dictionary. So every time you see a curly bracket, a little curly brace, it means this is a dictionary. So it's got key value pairs inside it. Every time you see a square bracket, it means this is an array. And as you pull the data out, you've got to extract the data you want so you can display it in the way you want to. And this syntax is called JavaScript Object Notation. And every web service uses this structure. So let's see how we get that data out. 3 lines of code. You can literally use the same 3 lines of code in every page. These are the 3 lines. The only thing that will change is the URL, isn't it? Because different resources will have different URLs. So I have my URL, which is a string, which is my web page address, if you like, of my resource. I use the URL lib2 to open it and read it into the variable called response, which is a string variable. And then I use the JSON library to decode it into, it's got a dictionary. So data is actually a dictionary which contains all the information from that feed. Okay? It is one dictionary, that one variable contains all the information that's in that response, in that data that's come back. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at that dictionary, and I'm going to show you how you can extract the arrays and the strings and all the values out of that dictionary. Because you've now got all the data in one big blob, haven't you? Ready to be used. What you've got to do is you've got to extract that data and use it in your web page. So the final thing we're going to talk about today is Python data structures. You only need to understand 2 data structures to be able to do the work. Dictionaries, obviously, and arrays. Unfortunately, Python doesn't call them arrays, it calls them lists. So if you come across lists in Python, it is an array, it's the same thing. Now, a dictionary, if I've got an example in a minute, yes, the dictionary stores key value pairs. So every value in the dictionary has a name. So if we look at the example there, I have a dictionary called person. You see that one? And it contains 2 values. It contains a name and the student ID. So it's a bit like a record in a database, isn't it? A bit like a database record. In fact, we use it to store records from databases. And what I've done, I've created my person dictionary, and I'm adding another item to that dictionary. Person course equals computer science. My dictionary now has 3 values in it. And if I want to access one of those values, I use its key. So I can say name equals person, square brackets, name. So the name variable now contains the word John. So I can extract data out of my dictionary by using the keys. And if I specify the key, I get the value back out of it. So does that make sense? Can you see how that's going to work? The example I'm going to give you does all this. It goes through the process of doing this, and you'll see how it all fits together. Python lists are arrays. The important thing about arrays is each index of the array has a number, not a key. So if I've got 10 people in my array, I access the first person by saying person, people 0, then people 1, then people 2, then people 3. So they're accessed by indexes, by numbers. What's really good about arrays is you can pass the whole array into your template. And in fact, when you did your chat room, your chat thing with Christina, that's what you were doing. You had an array of messages, and you passed that array into your template, and then you had a loop in the template to print out the messages in the table. So you've done it before, you just didn't know it was called an array or a list. So here's an example of an array. I create an empty array, I create a dictionary which contains my name and my student ID, and I add the whole dictionary into my array. So I now have one index in my array which contains a dictionary which contains, so you have to break it down into small pieces. And there is how I loop through my array. So I've passed my array which contains a dictionary. So my array is called students. And I can say for student in students. So every time it loops around, it's going to copy the current student into the student dictionary. And then student.name and student.student underscore ID. I can access the individual dictionary items using the dot notation. So I've created an array of student dictionaries. I pass my whole array into my template, and when I've got my array in my template, I can loop through and extract each of the dictionary items out of my array and display it in a table, isn't it? It's a table with two columns. So I'm going to show you an example next, which I think will make things make a bit more sense to you. But that's it for my content today. I was trying to keep it to a bit less than half an hour, so we have time to chat about stuff at the end. So we've covered pair programming, which I'd like you to have a go at this lab. Architecture of how you break your app into smaller Python files and templates. We've talked about how we log information, which is really important when you start writing your own mashups. I've showed you how to pass data in the URL, and I've also shown you how to read the data in and turn it into dictionaries and arrays.